Welcome to Diplomacy and International Relations by Bastian Freiburg. Today, we're diving deep into, well, one of the most complex geopolitical balancing acts playing out right now, Southeast Asia. Just picture this region, right? It's sort of positioned directly between the world's major powers. And it's navigating this incredibly tangled web of rivalries and partnerships, all while trying to carve out its own path. It's definitely high stakes, and we want to unpack the strategies and maybe some surprising factors shaping its future. So, our mission today is really to get a handle on the latest within ASEAN, that's the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. We'll be looking closely at its role, especially with the US China competition heating up, and also at its own efforts, internally to get more unified and influential. And to do that, we got quite a range of sources, everything from op-eds by retired diplomats, people who've been in the trenches, so to speak, to official statements from recent summits. It gives us a pretty wide view of the challenges, but also the opportunities facing ASEAN. Oh, and just a quick note before we really get started. If you find these deep dives valuable and maybe you'd like access to some extra episodes we do, you can subscribe on Spotify. There's a small monthly fee, and the link for that is right there in the description. Okay, let's get into it. When we talk about ASEAN in this multipolar world we're in, it really does feel like these countries were under immense pressure, a geopolitical pressure cooker, you could say. The U.S.-China strategic competition, it's not just background noise anymore, is it? It feels quite intense, especially around places like the South China Sea. So what does that actually mean for the countries caught in the middle?
Well, it means they're constantly walking a tightrope, trying to find these really nuanced positions. Some of the analyses we looked at, like Southeast Asia in a multipolar world, really highlight this.
Right.
You got countries, say the Philippines, maybe leaning a bit more towards the U.S. for security reasons, but then others, like Cambodia or Laos, they might find themselves drawn more towards China, often because of, well, significant economic ties and investments. And that divergence, naturally, puts a strain on ASEAN's ability to act as one.
Right. So it's not just about picking a side. We're also seeing these big powers sometimes kind of going around ASEAN, setting up their own deals, bilateral or these smaller minilateral groups. Does that risk making ASEAN, less central, or does it just force them to change tactics? How does that actually work on the ground?
Oh, it absolutely forces them to adapt. I mean, look at the U.S. Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, IPEF, from 2022. It includes some ASEAN members, but not all, alongside countries like Japan and Australia. And then China, it pushes its own groupings through things like RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. That's a huge trade deal, but significantly, the U.S. isn't part of it. These kinds of moves, they can definitely chip away at ASEAN's role as the main convener in the region, its power to set the agenda and create those region-wide frameworks. It kind of feels like chess pieces are being moved around ASEAN rather than through it sometimes.
And the economic numbers, wow, they really paint a picture. You mentioned the 2024 figures, Chinese foreign direct investment in ASEAN at 32 billion US dollars, US FDI at 28 billion. It's not a massive gap on paper, but you add in China's Belt and Road Initiative, that's real leverage, isn't it?
It creates uneven dependencies, absolutely. The Belt and Road Initiative pumps huge amounts of money into infrastructure across Southeast Asia. For countries like Laos or Myanmar, China is often their #1 economic partner. I think I saw a figure that China holds about half of Laos's external debt, something like $10.5 billion as of 2024. That kind of economic weight, well, it inevitably influences policy choices. It can pull members in different directions, away from a unified ASEAN stance.
Okay, so given this incredibly complex environment, all these pressures,
Yeah.
what is ASEAN actually trying to do? What's their fundamental goal in all this?
Deep down, I think ASEAN really wants to be that essential bridge, that mediator between the U.S. and China. The idea is to use their collective economic weight, their established institutions, to protect Southeast Asia's sovereignty, keep the peace, and ensure prosperity. All this focus on unity, on expanding dialogue, on integrating their economies more deeply, it's all aimed at managing those great power tensions right in their own neighborhood. It's about asserting their own agency, not just reacting.
And for you, listening to this, why should you care about this balancing act happening maybe thousands of miles away?
Because the stability or instability of Southeast Asia has huge knock-on effects globally. We're talking major shipping lanes like the South China Sea, critical supply chains for electronics, energy, all sorts of goods pass through there. Any disruption ripples outwards. It impacts economies, global security. What happens in ASEAN can, quite literally, affect the price of things you buy or the geopolitical climate we all live in. It's a real bellwether.
So with all that external pressure, it makes sense that strengthening from within is like priority #1 for ASEAN. The sources we read really hammered this home, the need for more unity, faster decision-making. What are the concrete steps being talked about? What can they actually do?
Well, there are several key things on the table. First, there's a big push to speed up the ASEAN economic community, the AEC blueprint. This isn't just about trade deals on paper. It's about real, practical economic integration, trying to reverse the recent trend where trade within ASEAN has actually declined. The goal is to make the bloc more self-reliant, less vulnerable to external economic winds.
Okay, economics can definitely help bind countries together, but Southeast Asia is so diverse, right? Different political systems, different national interests. Is just integrating economies enough, especially when political disagreements run deep? What else are they considering?
That's a really good point. Economics isn't a magic bullet. So another proposal is this idea of a crisis troika system. Basically, it would involve rotating chair positions, the current, previous, and next chairs working together to develop specific protocols for mediation. The aim is to have a faster, more unified response ready to go when a security crisis hits, rather than getting bogged down and trying to reach consensus from scratch every time. It's about being more agile.
And what about talking to the big powers? How does ASEAN make sure its voice is actually heard by the US and China?
Empowering their existing dialogue platforms is key. One idea is setting up specific working groups that actually include U.S. and Chinese special envoys, and their job to negotiate practical things like crisis communication hotlines, confidence-building measures, small steps maybe, but crucial for preventing misunderstandings from escalating. Direct, consistent channels. And then there's the idea of partnering more with the so-called middle powers. Think Japan, the European Union, Australia. The strategy here is to bolster ASEAN's neutrality. If you have more security options, more diverse investment sources, you're less dependent on any single great power. It gives ASEAN more breathing room, more diplomatic flexibility.
It is good to see some positive economic signs, though. ASEAN hitting 4.8% growth in 2024, projected 4.7% for 2025, driven by manufacturing, public spending, that helps, and the ASEAN Geoeconomics Task Force pushing for deeper integration, fully implementing RCEP.
Exactly. And what's really interesting, I think, is that ASEAN isn't just passively reacting, it's actively trying to build its own resilience, pushing the AEC, the crisis troika idea. They're trying to rewire their own systems, to make sure collective action can actually hold up under pressure. The aha moment, maybe, is realizing this isn't just diplomatic maneuvering. It's about whether a collective like ASEAN can maintain influence when big power competition is so strong.
Okay, so with these internal strategies shaping up, let's look ahead. Malaysia takes over the ASEAN chairmanship in 2025, and people are already calling it a pivotal moment. Why? Because tensions are high, the Myanmar crisis is still unresolved, South China Sea progress is slow. What's Malaysia's approach going to be?
Malaysia's chosen theme is inclusivity and sustainability. This comes directly from Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim's Madani philosophy. It's a concept focused on good governance, compassion, sustainability, prosperity, innovation, trust. A kind of holistic, values-driven approach to national development, which they want to bring to their ASEAN leadership.
And Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, he's been pretty direct, hasn't he? Especially about ASEAN's traditional principle of non-interference. How does his philosophy square with that, particularly on tough issues like Myanmar?
Yeah, he has definitely put a different spin on it. He famously said that non-interference is not a license for indifference, especially when it comes to human rights crises like the one in Myanmar. It suggests maybe a more proactive stance, moving beyond strict non-intervention to acknowledging a regional responsibility, particularly on humanitarian grounds. It could be a subtle but important shift in how ASEAN operates.
Let's dig into those flashpoints then. Starting with Myanmar, it's really tested ASEAN, hasn't it? Where do things stand with that 5-point consensus?
Progress has been very limited, unfortunately. The 5-C, that was ASEAN's big plan from 2021, calling for ending violence, dialogue, aid access. But the military junta in Myanmar, they tend to view it more as a constructive suggestion, not something they're strictly bound by. Plus, they've often blocked humanitarian aid, saying they're worried it'll reach opposition groups. That really hampers any effort to de-escalate things.
So how does Malaysia, with its emphasis on humanitarian issues and maybe a bit more willingness to engage, plan to approach this?
Well, the focus for Malaysia will likely be on the humanitarian crisis itself, especially point 4 of the 5PC, the aid delivery part. And crucially, they've signaled openness to engaging with all relevant stakeholders, which could include ethnic armed groups. That's aiming for a more inclusive dialogue. Laos, as the 2024 chair, did manage to re-engage Myanmar to some extent, so Malaysia has a chance to build on that. But realistically, major breakthroughs on the core political issues, probably unlikely in just 1 year. It's a very long game.
Okay, turning to the South China Sea, another major headache. It directly impacts global trade. The Code of Conduct talks, they were meant to be done by 2021. Now it seems unlikely even for 2025. What's the holdup? Why is it so difficult?
Yeah, the Code of Conduct, or COC progress, has been incredibly slow. It's just tangled up in so many conflicting claims and deep distrust. And we've seen some really worrying incidents. China's Coast Guard using water cannons, military-grade lasers against Philippine ships last year. That kind of thing just makes trust harder to build. Fundamentally, though, the big stumbling block is China's reluctance to agree to anything that might undermine its nine-dash line, claim its sweeping assertion of sovereignty over most of the sea. That makes a truly meaningful binding code very, very hard to achieve.
But Malaysia has a specific role here now, right? They're the ASEAN-China dialogue coordinator until 2027. How might that influence their approach?
That's right. It puts them in a unique position. Malaysia can try to leverage its historically decent relationship with China. They were the first ASEAN nation to normalize ties way back. Their preferred style seems to be more of a discreet approach, trying to manage tensions quietly, behind the scenes, to prevent things from escalating, rather than pushing for big public announcements that might just fall flat. So the goal for 2025 might not be a final COC, but more about managing the day-to-day friction, keeping channels open, and stopping things from getting worse.
You know, it's worth remembering these aren't just abstract disputes. The South China Sea, that affects shipping lanes vital for global trade, freedom of navigation, the stability of that whole region. It really does matter for economies everywhere, for the international rules we all rely on. Beyond just managing crises, though, Malaysia's chairmanship seems to have a broader vision, this idea of prompting ASEAN to look west. What's that about?
Yeah, this Look West idea is about deepening ties with the global South countries in the Middle East, Central Asia. We saw the first ASEAN summit with the Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC, back in October 2023. Malaysia is actually hosting the second one in 2025. There was even talk of inviting Chinese leaders for a potential three-way summit. It's about broadening ASEAN's diplomatic horizons, building more diverse partnerships beyond the usual U.S., China, Japan focus.
And we're also seeing movement with the BRICS group, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now others.
That's right. Malaysia, along with Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, they're now designated BRICS partner countries.
The strategy seems pretty clear.
Yeah.
Deepen economic ties, get more involved in multilateral forums outside the Western-led ones, and crucially, create alternatives to just being caught in the U.S.-China squeeze. It's a way to reinforce their non-alignment, give themselves more options, more strategic autonomy. It's quite a statement, really.
And on the digital front, this Digital Economy Framework Agreement, DEFA, planned for signing in 2025. That sounds like a big deal for the future. It really is.
Yeah.
DEFA is meant to boost digital trade within ASEAN, create common rules, ensure a safer online space, very important for future growth. And it fits right into the bigger picture, the ASEAN Economic Community's strategic plan for 2026-2030. The ambition there is huge. For ASEAN to become the world's fourth largest economy, they see innovation, digitalization, and sustainability as the key drivers for that. These aren't just buzzwords. They're core pillars of their long-term strategy.
There's also this dynamic of new leadership across ASEAN, lots of changes in the last few years. What does that mean for actually getting things done for that consensus ASEAN relies on?
It means things might take a bit more time. While you have leaders like Anwar actively building relationships, forging that strong collective consensus across the board isn't instant. Many leaders are still relatively new in their roles, and often, understandably, domestic issues demand their immediate attention, sometimes more than regional ones, especially sensitive ones like the South China Sea. Personal relationships have always been really important in ASEAN diplomacy, so rebuilding that deep level of trust and understanding among leaders, it's a gradual process.
It's fascinating, though, isn't it? ASEAN isn't just playing the game set by others. They're actively trying to reshape the board. This look west, the BRICS engagement. It feels like a real effort to avoid being defined solely by the U.S.-China rivalry. Almost a model for other regions, perhaps.
I think so. It's about creating options, building multiple layers of engagement. So if one relationship gets strained, they have others to lean on. That's what strategic resilience looks like in practice. It's definitely an example of how diversification can empower a region.
Okay, let's bring it down to specifics from recent summits. The 46th ASEAN Summit in Kuala Lumpur, May 2025, chaired by Malaysia. That seemed to set some major long-term goals. What were the key takeaways?
That summit really laid down a marker for the future. They endorsed ASEAN 2045, Our Shared Future. It's essentially their long-term roadmap, focused on strengthening the political and security community, emphasizing self-reliance. It guides their trajectory for the next couple of decades. And significantly, the summit also voiced serious concern about the war in Gaza, calling for civilian protection, a two-state solution. That shows ASEAN stepping up, maybe more than before, on global humanitarian issues, not just regional ones.
How does taking a stance like that on Gaza fit into their overall diplomacy, balancing global issues with their own regional focus?
It's a careful balancing act. By speaking out on Gaza, ASEAN projects a certain moral standing, aligns itself with concerns shared across the global south, and reinforces that non-aligned position. It's a way to show commitment to international norms and principles, even while juggling all the complex regional stuff. It signals they're not just navel-gazing.
And looking back slightly earlier, the foreign ministers meeting in July 2024, what stood out from that gathering?
That meeting really reinforced their strategy for engaging with the outside world. Strong reaffirmation of the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, the AOIP. That's their framework for dealing with external partners, focusing on things like maritime cooperation, connectivity. It's ASEAN trying to define its own terms for Indo-Pacific engagement. They also flagged concerns about rising nuclear risks, the potential downsides of autonomous weapons, and doubled down on tackling cybercrime, online scams, things like the Vientiane Declaration, aim at practical cooperation there.
So putting it all together, these summits show ASEAN trying to be really proactive, right? Working on internal cohesion and managing external relationships simultaneously. Quite the juggling act.
Exactly. It's a complex web, but the clear intention is to shape their own destiny, build resilience, and maintain their relevance in a world that's frankly pretty turbulent. They're trying to write their own future, not just have it dictated to them.
So, as we finish up this deep dive, it really leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? With all these immense pressures from outside and these ambitious plans for internal reform, can ASEAN actually pull off its Community Vision 2045? Can it become this resilient, sustainable, outward-looking force? Or will the sheer diversity of interests among its members, that constant need for consensus, ultimately hold it back? What role do you, listening now, think a truly cohesive ASEAN could play in making the world a bit more stable? Something to think about. Thank you so much for joining us for this exploration of ASEAN's evolving role. If you found this useful, please do take a second to rate Diplomacy and International Relations by Bastian Freiburg 5 stars on your podcast app. It really does help us reach more people trying to understand our complex world. And remember, you can subscribe on Spotify for extra content. The link's in the description. We'll be back soon with another deep dive.